Well, welcome back to Side Quest, and this is our fifth installment of Final Fantasy VII. And it sounds like we've just gotten both of our collaborators on here, and so it looks like the team is coming together nicely. Welcome, Mr. Wes Schantz, and welcome, Mr. Vincent Reese.
Welcome, Mr. Alec.
Hey guys.
It's good to be talking to you guys again, especially on a Labor Day when we celebrate the accomplishments of what people can do fighting together. And not to make light of it, but perhaps we can make a libation to Biggs and Wedge.
And Jesse.
And Jesse, of course, not to be forgotten.
Sexist.
And so, yeah, interesting. Perhaps you can make some comments on that and the fact that you're headless from this particular plane. So why don't I lay out what it is we played for the listeners, and then we can just dive in. So this time around, we saved right in front of the Shinra building, and we were presented with the option whether we wanted to dive right in or go up the stairs. And you suggested that we should go up the stairs in order to bear out a point that I was talking about earlier. But so just in broad strokes, we had a stair scene. We got into the Shinra building. We got to see several of the upper level floors, including a library full of some very interesting books, which I'm sure y'all paid very close attention to. We got to see a trail of blood, a capture. We met a president who we wanted to kill, who then got killed. We heard evidence of this great force, Sephiroth, who apparently, if we can settle the score with him, we can also save the planet. Isn't that the ideal? That if you can settle your beef with the person who you have beef with, that will also stabilize the planet, rather than destabilize it, which is probably actually what happens. We then had a series of boss fights where I'll humiliatingly have to admit to having been defeated not once but twice.
Oh, jeez, dude.
Yeah, hubris. I'm still cleaning up my act, apparently, in certain aspects of my life, including my video game prowess, which is either never been developed or has been on the decline over the recent years. And then we finally make it out of Midgar. And so, but before we dive in too much, I just wanted to give a quick congratulations to Mr. Wesley Schantz, who I know is just about to give his ultimate episode on another video game, Earthbound. Wes, did you want to say something about that very quickly? I just came out with your episode.
Yeah. I announced on my episode that I released yesterday that I'm gonna try to do a live stream on Twitch, which I've never
You're gonna
used before.
Twitch, dude?
I'm gonna get on
Next
Twitch
level.
and try to, I know. Well, I'm only like a few years late on it, but better late than never. It looks pretty easy to use. Anyway, I'm gonna try to figure it out and get that working by the Sunday 2 weeks from now. So the 16th of September will be the last episode that I'm planning at this point for the Earthbound series, and then I'll go on and do the Golden Compass. That's the next thing I'm going to talk about on my podcast.
That's great.
The video game Golden Compass?
There is a video game of it, actually. Oddly enough, they made one when the movie came out, actually.
That game's got to be so bad.
It's really, really interesting. I need to get a copy of it if possible. I'm going to talk mostly about the book, but yeah, adaptation and the idea of taking a book and making a video game out of it is something I definitely want to think about a lot during this read through of Golden Compass. It's so cool.
That's very exciting. And actually that makes me, and Vince, I do want to get your perspectives on Mandala, because I know you wanted to share those.
Yeah, I have like 900 theses, dude.
Very good. So you have caught up with Luther. It's good to hear about that. The listeners should know that we recently had a very stream of consciousness shared text message last night where basically Vince said that he had broken the genetic code of this mandala idea and had a thesis, and Wes then challenged him to get 93 more theses. It was actually 2 he came up with, and then Vince took it to the next level and decided to go tenfold more than that. So I guess he'll be a hyper Protestant by the end of this day.
Gross.
Yes. So
fucking Protestants.
So I just wanted to mention something that I had forgotten would even be a part of my experience playing, but losing and having to go back to a save point and play back through what I've already played was the most infuriating feeling for several reasons. One, humiliation. How could I lose in this children's game? Oh my gosh. 2, did I just waste my time playing a video game? I have important things to do. I'm a master teacher. 3, oh my gosh, now I have to deal with the humiliation of not being as good at something as Vincent Reese.
Yeah, dude, I haven't died once. I'm already at like 50 hours in the game. Underemployed life.
And it just makes me realize you do have good values instilled by these games in terms of I didn't pay attention to the fact that I could re-equip my party members before important moments where strategy would be necessary, where the player of the game has to pay attention to when they can strategize and then strategize appropriately, and that becomes more and more an important aspect of the game. But
yeah,
also,
Shmeed, I just want to remind you that you still lost even after I gave you the total cheat of using grenades on everything.
Yeah, I know, and I still haven't. I ignorantly have not updated my map and started using that, but I think now I might have to just in the just so that I don't destroy a controller and then I have to waste more time because of it. But that's something that Wes and I were talking about on our 100th episode that I thought was so interesting. That this is part of the game, the emotional connection you make to the narrative. That I was actually frustrated, that my nervous system was activated, that I was having a real moment where I was thrust into unknown space and didn't know what I was going to do and had my emotions completely dysregulated. And I feel like that is a major part of how we connect to the game and a piece of connection that you don't get in other media. For example, a book. If I want to move forward in a book, I read it. I never lose time reading, unless I'm one of those careless readers who has to read the same page 5 times because they can't focus their thoughts or attention. And but also the element of skill and attention paying is rewarded in this game. If you pay attention, you can get through in a smooth way, and you can get through quicker. And in fact, it's necessary in order to move forward. In order to get to that story, you have to actually engage in goal-pursuing behavior rather than simply reading. And that's something that I think I always felt about a video game, and I felt compelling, but I didn't know how to articulate. What do you guys think about that? And have you lost it all or had any near losses or lost time? And I also wanted to mention how annoyingly far apart save points are.
The thing that happened to me when I was in the Shinra building was, so I know, Vince, you told us that you get an interesting dialogue by taking the stairs. So that made me immediately want to test out what happens if you rush right in. So I did that. Like as a kid, when I played the game as a kid, I always took the stairs and I never rushed in. So this time I rushed in first. I was
the opposite. That's so funny.
You get attacked by some weak soldiers, and you like terrorize all the people in the foyer, and they run away from you like a herd of sheep, and run up the stairs eventually if you chase them the full way around. And so then you go up the stairs, these broad stairs, and on the second floor there's like a little shop, and the shop is still operating despite the fact that there's like chaos and soldiers trying to take down these terrorists.
Fighters, thank you.
Yeah. But so the shopkeeper won't let you open these 2 treasure chests in the back of the room. And it's like, what is this? Like, are we listening to this little shopkeeper right now? So, okay. But in that room, what happened to me was, in that room, there's this young couple looking at an advertisement on TV for Shinra line of automobiles. And if you talk to them, they eventually run away after saying like, honey, buy me that car. But anyway, so if you look at the screen, you activate the advertisement, and it goes on and on and on, showing you like all these specs of these imaginary car vehicle things, like steampunk style. And then in my game, I don't know if this happens in every copy of the game or I just have one that's messed up. When you watch the thing and then you come out of it, the game is frozen.
Oh dude, yeah, your game's cucked.
It's
so good.
It's bad, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get the screen to pick up. The music kept playing though. The music from the advertisement.
That's so frustrating.
And so it was like 10 minutes of gameplay or whatever. So I did the softer set still worked. So there are still like inputs going into the game. It was weird. I don't really know. I found one forum online where someone said it happened to them, but it seems like it's not a real widespread problem. But anyway, there's like you say, Alex, there's like technical elements where you don't usually have a book that just like suddenly glitches out on you. But I guess if it's an ebook, it could. But yeah, so I just had to restart, and then I went up the stairs. But you do get almost the same dialogue in the elevator, actually, if you rush in.
Oh.
A very similar exchange takes place once you reach the elevators. Barrett, apologizes, or more or less, but you don't get to see them huffing and puffing up the stairs, which is hilarious. So.
Yeah, and so it's funny that you mentioned the technical element, especially because in this shared party, this summon Voltron sort of moment that we're sharing together, that technology so frequently does get in our way for a limited time as well. And it is funny that what seems to be the biggest problem with it is that it's inhibiting us from fun, because I think probably both of you have seen, and probably Vince more than any of us, those videos on YouTube of kids freaking out when their video games are denied to them or something goes wrong. It's as if the justice of God is expected from the not only the in-game narrative perspective, but also the external hardware perspective. This better work, and if my save file gets corrupt after this many hours, Yep. I mean, it's almost as if it's preparing you for why it's important to stabilize your society, because you need to rely on so many things to work all at once in order for you to have the fun experience, that you better make sure that those factors remain.
Order society around proper hours of gaming.
Well, think about it. Yeah. How upset would you be after 30 hours of gameplay if your save file were corrupted? And I just see that as a microcosm for a young person of the experience of, like, say, 30 years of saving and then the banks collapse.
Oh yeah.
In one, I mean, you can still eat.
That's true. And yet, how deeply do these people freak out?
Oh yeah.
Even though if you were to put it on that scale, obviously not as big a deal. And yet, I think it tells you something about the power of the narrative experience, just how willing we are to work to get it, and how frustrated and upset we would be to A, lose our progress, but B, be denied the next step forward.
Well, my perspective on that, if I can throw it in there, is that please. So coming from being in one of those videos, you can probably find me on an old YouTube, but also being the gamer, you are in especially this game, say not as far as in like Counter-Strike or the games that evolved after Counter-Strike, you're in this godlike position. You have this absolute power over the game to an extent. You even have the ability.
Socrates' daemon.
Well, I wouldn't even use that. I would say that you can even manipulate time in these games with the save system. You are completely outside of the laws of the game. So you sort of develop this power complex where you have this you don't encounter any other real true obstacles or competing powers. But then mom comes in and she says, you need to go outside and you can't play your video game anymore. And all of a sudden, you can't hit up, down, X, Y and defeat this boss. So you have this idea, this powerful ego that's developed in the context of this game suddenly be challenged when you cannot load your save point before your mom gets home, or actually combat it in any true fashion. You are exposed to your ultimate weakness outside of the game. And that's sort of more of the escapist interpretation of gaming, which there's many reasons why people game. but that's definitely coming from a perspective in interpreting it.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Wes? It makes me think of Jean Piaget a little. I might say something after you about that, about what a game is supposed to be within the context of building a community of peers.
Yeah. Well, I found here's one really interesting part of this chapter of the game that I liked was when you get to a certain point in the building, you have the sort of God's eye perspective, which you take by crawling in through the ventilation shaft of the toilet, and then watching the Shinra board essentially have their final meeting with the president before he's impaled by Sephiroth. But so you get to see them and listen to them and see how petty these like movers and shakers of our society and politics and economics really are. Each of them is out for their own their niche, right? And you see that in the library too. Like each section of the library is demarcated from the others. And so there's this idea, like you're describing, each person in the game sort of dramatizes it, that they have their power over some little circumscribed area of life, and they are out to maximize that at all costs. Whereas your vision, right, as the player, and you're sort of seeing it through Cloud and Barrett and Tifa's perspective from there. Yours is a much elevated perspective, but the way that you see it, right, is through this little breakdown in the infrastructure, where the toilet ventilation shaft leads straight to the boardroom.
Yeah, the way down is the way up.
It's fascinating. It's a fascinating little moment, and you get to play that mini game in the library. You get to run into the head of security working out in the gym, and being like, security is really important to me. Like, I'm really taking this seriously, while you're like running around stealing key cards from people and infiltrating. Yeah, it's awesome. It's just great. I think there's a lot more funny stuff in this game than I realized as a kid. When you think about it.
I want to pick that up because I agree 100% with what both of you have said. And I mean, I think the fact that you, as the hero embodying the logos, put together the image of Midgar as a mandala yourself, as if you are the one who completes the image of the self by embodying it through embodying logos. It just makes me think that when you mention the pettiness of Palmer and Heidegger and Scarlett all looking after their own interests, that is sort of like being somebody within a game, simply having regard for the game rather than the society in which the game takes place. And so the problem with, like, say, a petty scholar or politician or journalist simply focusing on one node or aspect of reality rather than the sort of net in which it finds itself, the Mardukian net, is that rather than developing that logos perspective where you see how things work together and your place within it, thus giving your life meaning, you develop a loosened or abstract or absolutist perspective on your endeavor, which disconnects you from the goals of the whole. I mean, even in Shinra itself, has become disconnected from the goal of the maintaining the planet on which it lives in order to maintain itself, and showing that we can become so blind to that which is most important to us, or that which we rely upon in order to live, that we can actively work towards its destruction. I think it's sort of I mean, just agreeing with you that it again is showing us that the ultimate capacity you can develop is the logos, to be able to see yourself for who you are in the situation you find yourself and operate within that, rather than to just pretend like the small world in which you've developed skill in a domain of competency is the only world because you are so afraid of the unknown space around you.
I think also it's just remarkable to me that you get to a certain floor of the building and you meet Hojo, the scientist,
with that brow,
the sort of the ultimate like Luciferian intellect, right? Who's so confident in his own importance that he knows you won't kill him because he's the only one who can operate the delicate machinery, right? And then Barrett just like launches a bunch of bullets into the specimen chamber.
Yeah. Go off, King.
So it's suck it, Hojo. But so and then they've got Genova in there in a little chamber, reminiscent of Akira in his little holding tank thing, and they completely apparently leave out of their calculations the whole Sephiroth thing, right? So it's like, for all that they have this master plan to get Neo Midgar up and running in the Promised Land, they seem to have calculated without considering the ultimate living destructive, right? Whose mother is held in a tank in their building. It's just insane. It's like the leaving out, right?
Yes.
The narrative.
Yeah.
In the narrative, though, and I might be misremembering because I'm like 50 hours into the game now, but dude, I thought that they were still under the impression that Sephiroth had died.
So I remember this from the booklet originally, because I would read about these characters because I wanted to know everything about them, and especially Sephiroth. And I will definitely be talking about that and goals in life next time when we get into Sephiroth's story. But I believe he is listed as missing in action. So it's sort of Odyssean. It's unclear what his fate has been, particularly because it's Tifa and Cloud alone who know what his fate was.
And we haven't gotten a calm story yet.
Right. And so the issue is that they have left out what was uncertain. They're like the suitors from the Odyssey. They assume that he's gone, but they're like the administration of Hogwarts, assuming that the Chamber of Secrets will not be open again. It is an uncertain certainty that they have based their hopes on. And then, just as the president stabbed Sephiroth in his back, as he might believe, thinking himself some sort of mutant, Sephiroth stabs him in the back as well. That which gave him power has now taken his life, or taken power from him.
I'm gonna want to compare that image to the serpent when
absolutely.
We get to it.
He really likes pegging.
The two of them. Yeah, but the things that they say about Sephiroth in this chapter are pretty limited. There's like little rumors, and they're sort of comical actually, because one of them, I think it's Eris, says, "I've heard no one has ever seen him bleed or cry," and I think it's Tifa, I could be wrong, who says, "I heard that he was posted somewhere far away," and like, I thought he was like far away, basically, is what she says. Or it could be Barrett, I forget now. This is when they're standing around after you discover the president's body, basically.
So were they talking about Sephiroth? So I had a question about that. I wanted some clarity, so I'm glad you said that, because I thought they would be talking about Sephiroth, but then I also sort of cognitively shifted my apparatus to maybe suggest that they were talking about Rufus. But but it doesn't make as much sense that he would bleed so much as but unless they were trying to build up an ethos of him being inhumanly cruel, which he'll soon show, he'll disequilibrate the state even more, which is apparently his dad is a much better leader than he is, because he attempts to control people by means of the media and their opinions, whereas Rufus just does not care at all. Which is just go on, please.
Oh no, it's just I think Rufus's interruption into the plot here is almost as unexpected as Sephiroth.
Yes,
actually.
Bang.
There's sort of an interesting parallel going on there. He's another alter ego for Cloud as well, right? Like, he's the son of the powerful dead father, sort of thing.
Yes, and they have a one-on-one combat in which Cloud cannot finish him off. Yes, I found this section highly symbolic, that Sephiroth would interject himself into the plot directly, and that Palmer actually reports having seen his physical body as well.
Right.
It almost takes on like a post Christian negative version of the Jesus story, when he comes back and the apostles continually see him throughout.
Yeah, and I want to go off on that.
Yeah.
I really want to go off on that through this one and this the following episodes, because one of my theses is that
Of the 900.
of the 900 is that this actually inverts a lot of Christian imagery and a lot of typical tropes, but especially in I guess Western, I'd say liberal democracy, but also the religious aspects of it. And I don't know, can I just go off on my mandala?
Go ahead. And the listener should know that you do have a master's degree in East Asian studies, right? Or excuse me, ancient East Asian studies.
Yeah. Definitely anything before, after like 1400 AD in India, China, or Japan, I'm completely fucked on. But yeah, before that, I know Sanskrit. So one thing that we've been talking about a lot is that this is some sort of mandala, Midgar, and I'd say that it has the thesis number like 45. Midgar has the form of a mandala, but it does not actually have the content or the actual spiritual quality of a mandala. Now,
and a mandala is a magic circle.
Yeah, and so key to this, I think one of the big arguments for it is, what is this magic circle supposed to do? In my understanding of this magic circle, you have a figure in the center. Sometimes it's just an implied figure, but oftentimes you have like a bodhisattva in there.
It's like an embodied god, usually at the center.
And we have that in a way in Midgar. We have at the very top Shinra, Mr. Shinra. And this within this circle, you have the center and the circumference. And within the in-between of the center and circumference, you have order. You have structure, and you have also a protection from outside elements, oftentimes shown as demons or serpents.
And even thieves, we find out soon.
Yeah, but if we want to say that Midgar is a mandala created within the world that has the same qualities of this mandala, then we also need to reckon with the fact that this Midgardian mandala has the actual serpents and beasts within it. Yes. It does not protect those within it from the outside, the disorder. In fact, in our entire time within the, I guess, lower city, we see the absolute disorder, the past of the war and infrastructure that has just been allowed to rot and decay. And that's part of this mandala aspect, but there's also, I think, an almost demiurgic quality to get into maybe some like poor understanding of Gnosticism here, where you have the mayor in the that you meet, and we find out that he doesn't do anything.
And he works in the corporate structure, in their corporate building.
Yeah.
He literally works there.
Yeah. And the thing to remember is that Mr. Shinra isn't the president of Midgar. Mr. Shinra is the president of Shinra, a corporation. But
power company.
A power corporation.
Yeah. So you have this first demiurgic quality, or maybe like a false god placed to rule over the city. and that's the mayor. And this is going to be broad strokes, but above that, then behind him, you have this ruler, this non-governmental ruler, this corporate ruler, Mr. Shinra, who believes that he has structured the world and Midgar such that he is safe and Midgar can continue its domination of the world without, say, Avalanche, without Sephiroth, without Wutai.
They can continue the same behavioral strategy that's worked in the past,
and that's
indefinitely into the future.
That's supremely demiurgic in the sense that this Shinra has forgotten the source of kind of where he came from. In this story, it would be the life stream, but in the one of the Gnostic traditions, it would be this greater above God and this Sophia, this wisdom that operates as a intermediary. But this demiurge, this Shinra, is the ruler of the physical world. But boom, in comes Sephiroth. And Sephiroth is this wisdom, perhaps, of this greater god, Genova, which I think is pretty easily understood as a stand-in for Jehovah, the Tetragrammaton, a Christian god.
That requires a head or a set of eyes.
Yeah.
Somebody to embody and focus it. But just
pause
there, Vince, because this is really good. I just want to hear what Wes has to say on this, because it sounds as if what you're suggesting is that this mandala is a corrupt mandala because the principle at the middle of it is power, which is doomed to corrupt itself. And that reminded me of what
Spider-Man.
No, that reminded me of what Wes was saying about the Luciferian aspect of this building. I mean, this is a very tall building we find ourselves in, too. Very Tower of Babel-esque. Mm-hmm. Very much made by man, with several people who speak to different interests or different languages within it. And so, Wes, what do you think about the interpretation that Vince is spinning out here?
I'm on board with it. I'm also not real versed in either Eastern stuff or Gnosticism or any of that, but I'm sort of following. And what I thought about was particularly the connection between Mayor Domino.
Yeah, that's Dominus,
famed founder of the pizza chain.
He describes himself as a librarian, essentially, cooking the books and keeping track of it for his corporate overlords. And he's got a pretty ironic approach to the whole thing. And it does seem right that Shinra loses perspective precisely because he's able to see that there's a false demiurge below him, but he mistakenly takes himself then as the real deal, right? Because of that between him and Domino. Whereas Domino being below, see that the real thing is definitely not Shinra, right? This is just a little house of cards they've got going, Ponzi scheme, and I really like the way that Genova, by this little one-letter mistranslation or obfuscation or whatever is going on, wordplay, skirts being sacrilegious, basically, right? And so you can sort of leave it up to the player to bring in all kinds of, just invite all kinds of religious and metaphysical speculations. But essentially what you have is, like I said, I think like a pretty clear allusion also to the Japanese culture of anime, going back to the major work Akira. That's the one I'm familiar with because you put us onto that one, Vince, saying that there's some things that this game takes from it, like most pop culture does. And so you have this kind of biological god figure, right? This freak of nature, this lusus naturae, which is also potentially the god, right? But again, that's sort of like the question, right? Like where is the ultimate reality grounded here? Do we have access to it? Is it going to destroy us? or is it
Ooh.
something that we can
Power.
That's excellent. That makes me think two major things. One being that Genova will later be described as a blight from the sky. And just two things about that: the moralistic language and the presence of nuclear weapons being used against them in the past, potentially due to their own immoral acts. Perhaps that's the Solzhenitsyn sort of self-reflective piece that's maybe coming through here. I'm not sure, but something I would put forward as like a very weak hypothesis. But also the fact that she's sort of a headless biological being that can have her power harnessed by an individual makes me think of her in conjunction with Vince's God Eye view. It's in a way she could also be a representative of, say, the nervous system and the negative great mother that will destroy you if you act immorally as a people. And that point I think is weaker than just saying that since we have this God's eye perspective and Genova lacks a head, I feel like something is being said about how to put this, how the species human perceives itself through our individual lives.
Well, here's
the many-faced God.
Here's another thing that I thought was interesting as well, is that we're beginning to see sort of this deconstruction of a center, and I think this is what I would argue, in that we were previously discussing about how the world sort of looks from the human perspective, but now we're beginning to have many different perspectives becoming aligned with this party, with Cloud's party, the central human, the person we are meant to identify with. We have Red 13, actually Nanaki, who we find out later, not a human, yet is of incredible importance to Hojo's experiment, and we find later to a greater thread within this planet. We also find out that this presumed human, Eris, is not a human in the conventional sense of Barrett, Cloud, Tifa. She's an ancient. And then we also have Sephiroth. We have a created being. And then we have Genova. And on one case, you have an alignment of ideas despite coming from different, I guess, special backgrounds with Red 13, Nanaki, Cloud, and Eris. But then you have the antagonistic, the foreign power of Sephiroth and Genova. And aligned with that, I'd also say the Shinra Corporation and its, lackeys.
Right. The anomaly that inevitably transposes itself on stabilized order that cannot be dealt with simply by shows of power, but by the logos. And what you make me think is that this story isn't so much a story about even the world in which Final Fantasy VII exists, but a story about Midgar. Because Midgar now actually literally, if you think of the context of, say, the Buddha's garden or Eden, the well-watered place, now has a giant sort of opening into it.
Two openings.
This Sector 7 is destroyed. And so the mandala no longer has, just as the center has just died, the president, though he's been replaced, so has the circumference also been compromised.
Well, one thing I'd say on that is that the circumference was never completed. And if we look on floor 64 or something, we are given the option, as you said, to construct this mandala. But we notice that
still with that
there's a jagged edge. And, a naive interpretation would be that, this is Sector 7. But if we go back and we watch the cutscene, we see that the entire plate of Sector 7 has fallen. Not a jagged edge. And what that actually is, that jagged portion is actually Sector 6.
The unfinished.
So that's another thing. When we come into this game, this very mandala isn't even completed. It has and this could be a symbolic interpretation of its own inner corruption.
And also that they're already moving on to the next city, right? Without having finished the first one. As if the city itself was a representation of a human, an imperfect human that is never complete, like an Ouroboros who never catches its tail. And so that though they're so close and they've made so much progress, now off to the promised land.
Well, you even
right?
you even have that in the upper lower dichotomy. You have a part of the city that's integral to it, it seems, that is nonetheless forgotten and moved on for all resources to be focused on the upper. So it seems that it is a continuation of this, practice that Shinra Corporation is doing. They don't finish and they also don't maintain.
Right. Wes, what are you seeing here?
Oh, I was thinking about how we see the president visit a couple times. He visits the reactor as you're blowing it up, and then he visits. Apparently, it's him. He visits down in the honeybee lounge, and so there is a function for the lower depths. It's just that, as you say, the resources are not being directed there; they're just being taken from there. Right. This is sort of Barrett's whole beef about the oppression and the destructiveness of Shinra's approach.
It's almost
No,
it's almost as if what it's trying to show us, even in these early stages, is that the ultimate perspective for a society which wishes to stabilize itself and maximize prosperity, which people in calm will tell us just how prosperous they are because of Shinra, even though monsters appear because of it, which I take as a metaphor for capitalism.
Right.
But I mean, like, duh, in like a serious way, that in order to exist, in order to have maximum prosperity, there also needs to be the potential to produce monsters. And so that's those are the two sides of the same coin, the order and chaos piece. The more order you let in, the more potential there is for chaos, which I think is something we were talking about earlier when we say align your expectations with finishing this game, and then 30 hours in, boom, corrupt save file, and then you're done. Oh man, and I better make sure not to lose this thought. Yes, but the ultimate way to stabilize the society isn't just to get close to the finish, whatever that happens to be, idealize, and then exert power and move on to the next thing in order to sort of ignore the problems of the present, or and then just repeat or reiterate the same process over again somewhere else, but to, like it says in the New Testament, wash the feet of the beggars, which is a metaphor for the top giving concern to the bottom of the society in order to minimize its violence, its poverty, and its capacity to destabilize the top, because it is, obviously the foundation of it, which is what a pyramid represents, of course. Vince.
Oh yeah. Christ, I hope this isn't too tangential, but I kind of want to circle back to the I guess, no, is that a quad? Yeah, it's a quadpartite, I guess. Distinction of power within Midgar. You have Domino, you have President Shinra, then you have Sephiroth and Genova. And we sort of stopped at
and the hero, of course,
and the hero, Cloud. Which, if we are going to take any lessons from the episode of Adventure Time, Box Prince, we know that the hero is actually outside of society.
That's right, because it can be embodied in any particular one.
But we have, again, another inversion of Christianity, where this messenger, Sephiroth, which I guess you could alternately equate with Sophia or Jesus, depending on if you're taking a Gnostic or a, more or even exoteric understanding of Christianity.
Or even the Kabbalistic Sephiroth tree.
Oh
which
yeah,
is a symbol for
and
wisdom.
and also the seraphim, one of the orders of angels. It's like all just thrown in there, and I'm not too sure with what order. But you have an inversion of blessed are the poor. You have an inversion of the Beatitudes in Sephiroth's claims. He is not fit to inherit the world because of his meekness and his understanding and his walking with the lepers. He is fit to inherit the world because of his power, because he is the ultimate organism descended, one in being with the ultimate organism, Genova. So
He seems to make the error that he thinks the world exists for him, when in reality he exists for the world. Go
or
on.
well, I don't even know if Sephiroth could exist for the world because he was created by something, from something outside of the world, for the purpose of this, I guess, transnational global corporation, which finds itself at odds with the world itself. So maybe the buck is even further behind, but I don't know. Go ahead.
I thought as you were saying the thing about monsters, and I think Sephiroth sort of fits that as sort of an absolute monster, an extreme version of that. Uh, I think about maybe trying to figure out Red 13's introduction at this point in the story
Mhm.
as well. Uh, he seems to be aligned with Eris, oddly
Mhm.
enough, because they're both these specimens that Hojo is very proud of and is working on some sort of master plan to do with resurrecting Genova, it
Well,
seems.
he wants them to fuck, and he wants to watch it, which is like
Yeah,
whatever, Hojo.
if you want, yeah, if you spell it out. All right, yeah, sure. So that's his sort of introduction then, is Red 13 is the spouse in that sense of Eris. And
Rapist.
uh, yeah, he's a he's presented as a monster,
Yeah.
but then he immediately joins the party to fight against
Ah,
the really nasty
I
monsters.
see.
And he's really
Mhm.
powerful. Uh, but but then even later, it's revealed that he can speak, and he's like gentle and intelligent. And so he's in a way more human than the people who've been trying to control him. Um, so we haven't heard Sephiroth
Mhm.
speak yet
Mm,
and seen on screen yet. He's just this trail of blood and
yes.
the mess of the Genova chamber after he's been through it.
And I want to ask about
He's,
that trail of blood at some point. What was being dragged that entire time?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I wonder to what extent Red 13 is sort of a racist or stereotyped embodiment of the spirit of the past. Obviously, a Native American figure, given that he comes from Cosmo Canyon and has feathers on his head, and is also amongst the last of his kind.
Mhm.
With his father petrified in a proud position overlooking the canyon. He's obviously a Native American figure, just as Barrett is a black figure. And so he, alongside Ares, who is also an ancient and thus an embodiment of the feminine element of the spirit of the past, Hojo is trying to create a promised land in the future through blending together, by means of the scientific rationality or logos, a new spirit or tradition that will embody the golden age of the past in the present. But his error, sort of like President Shinra's, is he is attempting to exert force over nature rather than discovering the appropriate way in order to find and embody the promised land. He is trying to force not only nature but also naturally conscious beings, and in an even more gruesome affront against innate morality. He is trying to bring about his he is trying to bring about the promised land through creating the ultimate negative situation of forced rape between conscious beings. It is a pure disconnect between means and ends. It seems like if you're going to bring about the promised land and this is the means by which you do it, then it's probably a land of damnation. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful sort of microcosm of Shinra's Mako reactors
Yes.
sucking the life force out of the planet, right? It's like, yeah, it's like a dramatization on a different plane of the same principle. Yeah, and the way that Red 13 reacts is not unlike the explosion of the reactors that Avalanche takes responsibility for, right? It's like the 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 thing that you thought was going to lead to more power for yourself instead bites the hand that feeds it, right? Like
Yes.
turns around and asserts its independence, and you realize, well, hopefully you realize then that it has a nature as well, right? And it's working out its own purposes, which are not the ones that you had imposed upon it. I like the analogy with the Native American um, tradition or something like that, and how it's being appropriated here. And it's mostly, so far at least, with the aesthetics. I agree. It's sort of like there's these aesthetic cues that are supposed to sort of put Red 13 in touch with certain stereotypes or traditional ideas about Native Americans. And his music goes with that too. I think is the most telling thing for me, at least. It's like very, yeah,
Well, even
stereotypically.
his attack is a representation of the cycle of the ages, right? He does several flips and then kicks you.
Yeah, it's so beautiful to see him. um his fluidity of movement is one of the coolest, I think, elements of the graphics so up to this point in the game. Yeah, he's awesome. Love him.
And it's interesting too because I think what's represented here is that his appropriation is not a negative, but rather an appropriately positive thing that adds to your perspective. That once one acquires the perspective of the past or the spirit of the past, that one becomes stronger and gains access to its wisdom, which
Yeah.
strikes me as not a negative thing, but a positive thing.
Yeah, I like how at this point you get certain materia that sort of go with this idea. He comes with an all paired with fire, and then he comes with a sense, which has a little more experience on it than your sense does. And you also pick up the enemy skill materia, which I think is really, really cool. It's like one of my favorite things about the game is that you wear the enemy skill. It doesn't change anything about your stats, so it leaves you like a powerful physical a tank. And if you get hit with the attack, then you learn the attack for certain enemy attacks, right? So the first one you can learn is just outside Midgar. You can get the mantra magic, which is a bunch of little rockets that hit all the enemies.
Cool.
Which is like pretty good at this point in the game to have, because you can use it over and over.
Yeah, it only has 8 MP, so it's a really good low-level spell to attack the entire enemy party. And it's a great way to XP farm.
So those three things you mentioned, Wes, fire all, the logos that moves throughout all cultures and is thus exists as guiding light or source of wisdom for all those who will come after. Since more developed, the more you add others' perspective to your own, the more you develop the capacity to sense what is going on. And then enemy skill, the best way to destroy an enemy is not like President Shinra, to try and kill them and ignore them even if they don't die, but to make them into your friend, to take them into yourself, to bring them into your known territory.
Yeah. And you can only do that by suffering the attack.
Yes.
Yourself.
Wowzer.
You have to understand it. That's excellent.
His tail is like a little his tail's like a little candle.
Yeah.
You see this in the CGI at the end when you're getting on the motorcycle on the truck. His tail is like very, very bright. The tip of it is like a little candle flame.
I would say that's his ultimate tragedy, because that references something across space and time.
Charmander.
Probably
the absolute Charmander.
Well, and probably that they never read is from Dante, and there's this beautiful quote about Virgil that he, and this is what Statius, who was saved by means of Virgil's work, but Virgil was not. What he says of Virgil, who will return to hell to be damned, that he was like a guide who holds the candle behind himself and does much good for those behind him, but none for himself. And I see that as the guiding force of tradition. It no longer has the eyes to move forward, but it can guide our eyes towards where it has gotten, and then we have to do the rest ourselves. We have to now be out in the world if we're going to escape from the structures and the oppression of Midgar. We have to suffer the desert. We have to figure it out for ourselves, and we have to have a direct confrontation with the serpent, which we are not yet strong enough to do.
Speak for yourself, dude. I crushed that.
Did you get
Hell yeah, I
beta
got
from
beta.
it as well? Yeah.
Dude, that's such a dope attack.
All right, guys. All right. So, how about? I mean, that is awesome. And well done. I can't wait to see what Sephiroth did to that snake, and I can't wait to talk about the things that were said of him, because those words have never left my mind after hearing them. The things that people say of Sephiroth and how they spoke about him, and I suppose that's also how people react to him in the game as well. But what are some closing thoughts? Was there maybe something we wanted to finish with? As we continue to go up the stairs in the Shinra building together.
So if you do take the stairs, somewhere along the line you can pick up the elixir, and it's an item that is definitely worth getting, and it's an item also which is so good that I practically never use them. I just hoard them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Things like that, and the turbo ether that you get from the little kid if you don't steal his money.
No time ever feels important enough to use them.
Exactly. There's an item also in the locker room that you can't get
that's
yet.
Yeah, you look at I'll leave that.
Yeah. And you say, it's a megaphone, like who would ever use that? And so you leave it there. It's so weird that there's these little things in Shinra building that you can't get yet. It reminds me of that one little room down in the slums near Don Corneo's, where there's this thing that like shoots you if you try to approach it. It's malfunctioning, right? So there's these little hints that you will need to come back, unless you just like refuse to let go of them and just like never proceed, right? You're trying to figure out how to get them now. You just can't get them now, right? So
Wes, you are so smart.
Well,
it's like, so you're sort of spinning out that this is where the traditional prodigal son narrative takes place from the RPG, that we're leaving the place where the action is, but that the action will remain to be done by us, almost as if the mistake that we make as the hero in leaving the city is the same mistake that the president makes by wanting to leave the city and pursue the promised land and create Neo Midgar, as if we try and avoid or go into strange lands to avoid the strange lands at home that Vince said are ever present.
Ooh, I said that? That's fucking smart.
Sometimes I articulate what other people say. Well, you got to wield the Masamune if you have it. And so, so I think, well, that's probably a great jumping off point for us this week.
What's Vince's thought?
Oh yeah. Vince.
So my two things, another thesis 428 is, again, I introduced this last week, this idea of role versus essence, which, as I've been thinking more about this, is something that's actually played out through the entire, I guess, history of Final Fantasy games. So I guess what I want to introduce right now to sort of build on this is a thesis. Sephiroth has a very essential idea of who he is, as determined, predetermined, and necessary to carry out at the, I guess, risk of destroying the entire world. On the other side, you have roles, and this is our party. The roles that can be taken, while there are definitely, existing predispositions for magic users or sword users, such as Eris and Cloud, there's nonetheless the ability to change in order to suit the roles of the party. And this is, I'm not going to try and make a greater metaphysical claim about the nature of the world. I'm going to just say
the nature of humans.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that from this perspective of the game, we're already, the game is already saying something about maybe this essential individual who I see as embodied in Sephiroth. And I'm saying that with a lot of loaded philosophical ideas behind it that I'll hopefully expound on later. And then ourselves, the player, the hero and the heroes who can fit other roles. What's this tension between them? And perhaps what's also the tension between maybe this commentary within the game of maybe Christianity and a non-Christian worldview.
Well, it's interesting because you're also suggesting that there are many ways to be an individual in society, and that you have natural predispositions, and that you can potentially offer your greatest value by following and enhancing those. But then when necessary, you can take on a different role in society when things happen. That's possible too.
I guess one thing too is that, and I've noticed this in my own listening to people, is that I guess I'm using individual here more in like a Lockean sense, an individual in a state of nature without any, I guess, responsibilities to him, to others around him, as opposed to, say, a biological individual, say the individual that can come together with others to mate, reproduce, an individual that's very different from, say, how we're interacting right now is how I would characterize the Lockean.
I suppose we'll have to explore what it is to be an individuum, to be an unbroken
Whoa.
thing. Because even the word itself seems to suggest part of a greater whole.
Mm-hmm.
I think examining the interplay between society and the individual and one's effect on it and one's importance to it is precisely what we're doing here through our individual efforts. So, Wes, what did we miss, and what should we close on?
I was just trying to think through the analogy Vince is laying out there. It's really interesting. The role and the essence, the Christian and the Eastern, whatever you want to call, non-Christian, I guess. I was just thinking about that. I think we pretty much talked through what I can remember being interesting about Shinra building, and obviously we're gonna eventually circle back around to it. So if we did miss something, we can get it then.
Well, I look forward to returning to the Tower of Babel at the center of a mandala with y'all soon.
70th floor. Yeah.
Tight.
Yeah.
All right. See you guys soon.
See y'all.
This is excellent.
Okay.
Bye.
Happy Labor Day.
Happy Labor Day.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.